Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this remembrance ceremony for our father, our Opa, and our gross Opa. Before we begin this service, I would like to thank Mary Kruger for playing a prelude for us at the service, as she did for our mother's service 7 years ago. I'd also like to thank Linda Thiessen Belch for her words at the service at Evergreen Cemetery this morning. Finally, to all of you, thank you for being here to support our family, to remember Henry Penner. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Psalm 118:24. An unconventional Bible passage for a funeral service. But for my father, I don't think so. Although we are all feeling sad that Dad, Opa, and Gross Opa has passed away, we have had more years together than most could ever hope for. He was able to watch his children, his grandchildren, and now his great-grandchildren grow and develop. And through all of that, Opa was our role model for patience, kindness, and loving care. What more could we ask for? So let us remember him today with joy in our hearts and gratitude for a life well lived. At this time, 3 of Henry's grandchildren will read his life story: Doug Enns, Debbie Levasseur, and Michael Penner.
Okay. The life story of Henry Penner. Henry Penner was born on September 17, 1926, in Kronsfeld, Russia, in present-day Ukraine. He was adopted as an infant by Henry and Anna Penner, who eventually moved to Fronsfeld, where Henry was raised. The 1920s and 30s were difficult years, as farms were collectivized and the government controlled everything. As a young boy, it was Henry's job to take care of the horses on the farm, and he loved his work. He grew up attending the Mennonite church in his village and was baptized as a young man. When the Second World War broke out, life became difficult for German-speaking Mennonites, and in 1943, when Opa was just 17 years old, the Germans occupied this area for roughly 2 years. The German Mennonites were treated well by the German troops, as they shared the same language and the same background. Henry's father worked in a mill, while his mother kept busy providing shelter for the many German soldiers who were passing through. Opa was often asked to serve as messenger. In September, when the German troops were ordered to retreat, the Mennonites were told to gather their belongings as they would be allowed to follow the soldiers west. And when they arrived in Hindenburg, Germany, they were dispersed to different areas around the country. However, Opa's family stayed in Hindenburg, and for the next couple of months, Opa, along with 2 other teenagers, worked in an office which organized the placement of these new immigrants. On January 3rd, all the young men were drafted into the German military. Many Mennonites said they didn't want to fight, but they were told they can either join or be sent back to Russia. And that wasn't much of a choice. Being sent home would result in certain death in a work camp. And so Henry was sent to a training camp and eventually became military police. He was sent to Trieste, Italy, until the war ended in 1945. Opa, along with other German soldiers, was then sent to Trento, which is in Italy, to a camp which housed 1 million detainees waiting to return back to their homes. They lived in tents that housed 20 men each, but they were only given 800 calories a day. The food was delivered to the tent in bulk, and there were often fights about dividing the food. But in true Opa style, he designed and built a scale that he could use to ensure that all the portions were equal and fair. This is the Opa that we know. He creatively solved a problem, built something from nothing, and treated others with dignity and respect. After they finally made it back home to Germany, there was a lot of chaos and confusion as Mennonite immigrants moved to various regions in the West. Oma had escaped alone, but she was reunited with her brother John, and they eventually moved to Udorf, Germany. They had heard that there was an estate owned by a local baron that was welcoming workers. When John and Oma arrived, they were given a place to sleep with Henry and Anna Penner, Opa's parents. It was on this estate that love blossomed between Opa and Oma. During the day, work was hard, but they were young and healthy, and they enjoyed each other's company. Opa was known as a terrible tease, stealing the girls' kerchiefs and hats and running away with them. That's news to me. Opa gradually began to show an interest in Oma, and it was after the war, and people just didn't have the necessities of life. One day, Oma wanted to make noodles, but she didn't have a rolling pin. So once again, Opa, being the resourceful person that he was, made a rolling pin and brought it to her the next day. Another time, Opa made a dustpan out of a piece of tin and a small broom from several nearby shrubs. At this time, Opa's parents made the decision to leave Germany for Paraguay, while Oma and her family were being sponsored to come to Canada. Opa and Oma didn't want to leave each other, and so they decided to get married and come together to Canada. Opa couldn't afford a ring, but Oma's family had been getting care packages from her family in Canada, mainly consisting of coffee and cigarettes and other things. And so a deal was struck with a local jeweler, a carton of American cigarettes for 2 rings made from a silver dollar. Opa and Oma married on June 22nd, 1947, on the estate where they had both lived and worked. They wanted a meal for the big day, and so they pestered Mr. Vitout, the manager of the estate, for a sheep to be used as stock for the borscht that would be served that day. Mr. Vitout was so excited about having a wedding on the estate that he gladly supplied them with what they needed. Oma's brother John used a pound of coffee to purchase some parachute silk on the black market. This parachute silk became Oma's wedding dress, which was then used for numerous other brides in the years to follow. So on the day of their marriage, 50 people arrived by horse and wagon and enjoyed the wedding and a meal of borscht and plats. John, Uncle John, was born in March the following year, but the birth was not without its complications. Oma struggled afterwards and required surgery to get better. When the doctor told Opa that he wouldn't perform the surgery and began to leave the room, Opa once again, being resourceful as he is, offered a pound of coffee to him. The doctor quickly retrieved his medical bag and performed the surgery on the spot. As always, resourceful Opa always finds a way.
In early November 1948, Opa and Oma, with their infant son John, boarded the ship Scythia at Cuxhaven to travel to their new home in Canada. They had mixed feelings. They didn't know what to expect in Canada, and they felt sad to leave behind what was familiar and comfortable. They were on the ship with about 1,000 immigrants. Along with the Russian Mennonites, there were Jews, Poles, French, German, and many other nationalities. The men and women were separated and placed in different locations below the main deck. After 2 weeks at sea, Opa and Oma arrived in Quebec City on November 15th. From there, they took the train to Windsor, where they were met by Jacob Ham Sr., his wife Olga, Frank and Gertrude Toes, as well as John Toes and his wife Margaret. Olga took in 10 members of Oma's family, which was an amazing act of hospitality to these new immigrants. These loving acts of kindness were much appreciated by Opa and Oma, and this sense of gratitude remained with them for the rest of their lives. From there, Opa, Oma, and John moved to a small house on the farm of Jacob and Gertrude Coop. Opa did farm work, plowing fields, planting, weeding, and working in the greenhouse. Since there was farm work for only 6 months of the year, Opa began looking for another job where he could work full-time. This took him to Duke's Farm in Olinda, where they lived for the next 6 years. During this time, Henry, Vern, and Helga were born, and it was a busy life for both Oma and Opa. Gatherings with friends were always impromptu events, was never a fancy meal. It might consist of potatoes, sliced tomatoes, and raw kuchen, but they were happy to spend time together with their family and their friends. In the early 50s, Opa got a job working at Pyramid Canners in Leamington. He finally had a job that could provide all year long. In 1957, Opa and Oma bought their first home, a tiny wartime house on Maynard Street in Leamington, and they were thrilled. An indoor bathroom and 3 bedrooms and a cute little backyard, and it was all theirs. It was a happy childhood for the kids, filled with good times playing with friends in the neighborhood. At Eastside Playground with its summer programs were sports for the boys and piano lessons for Helga. Opa and Oma worked hard, and Opa continued to work at Pyramid Canners, which eventually became Canadian Canners, and Oma worked for a period of time at the tobacco factory on Oak Street and also cleaned houses. They always stressed to their children that they had to be respectful to their neighbors, even if some of them were hesitant about an immigrant family and 4 young children moving into the neighborhood, German speaking on top of that. Over the years, they made many friendships in the neighborhood. Friday night was always very special for the kids. They had to go to German school, but when that was over and they got home, Dad had made hot dogs for them, and they were allowed to sit in the living room to eat them as they watched the Flintstones together. When they turned 15, all of them started working at the canning factory in the summer. Opa, not wanting to show special treatment, saved the hardest jobs for them. But they saw how well respected Opa was and did their best to make him proud. Sometimes Opa had to work with difficult people, but he treated them with respect, and that was returned to him in kind. One of the workers was known as the local tough guy, who often ended up getting in fights at the local bars on the weekends. Opa knew that he was a hard worker, and so Monday morning he would go to the jail, bail him out, and bring him to work. And this was an easy decision when it had been made to allow him to lose his job, but Opa recognized positive qualities in him. In Opa's free time, he loved to fish and spend time with his brother-in-law John on his boat on Lake Erie, as well as with the boys and some of his grandchildren on the dock in Leamington. Time went on, and the children grew up, went to high school, and on to university. Mom and Dad pushed them to get an education, and it must have been hard with 3 of them in university at the same time, but they managed.
Over the next number of years, all 4 of their children left home for their jobs and marriage. Henry and Darlene and Vern moved away, while Helga and Dennis and John and Linda stayed close by. Over the years, Opa and Oma were blessed with 8 grandchildren and 13 great-grandchildren. Family gatherings at Christmas, Thanksgiving, and Easter were a joy, bringing all of us back together for amazing food and great company. At these family gatherings, after the table was cleared, Opa loved to play cards with his children and his grandchildren, but we all knew that he was a true card shark, and we had to pay attention to what we were doing. Sometimes we were given some kindly advice about which card to play or what move we should have made. Opa and Oma finally moved from their home on Danforth Street to the Heritage Garden Apartments when Oma turned 80. Here they spent many happy years until Oma began showing signs of dementia. They moved into the retirement home from there, with Oma passing away on August 15th, 2017. Our family spent many years visiting both Oma and Opa, and we have memories of sitting by Opa's window as he fed the squirrels and the birds, going for a walk in the park, and sitting on a bench while the grandchildren ran around the maze. We all have our fondest memories. Sherry remembers the fantastic Christmas dinners we used to celebrate together. Tom, during a difficult year in his school life, would sometimes call Opa to come and pick him up because he felt sick, and Opa never hesitated and was always there. For myself, I remember that Opa was a part of several firsts in my life. My first fishing experience on a boat, catching a fish, my first tree climbing adventures, and the first time I ever had a pellet gun lesson and shot at some tin cans in his backyard. Christine reflects on the fact that Opa and Oma were her heroes because of their kindness, generosity, and their work ethic. Jackie remembers that Opa would always climb the ladder in the garage to the attic to get down the little red bike all of the grandchildren rode on. This is also where the ladder was kept for all the grandchildren to climb the tree in the front yard. For Christopher, he remembers taking long walks with Opa in the backyard where they could marvel at the beautifully kept flowers and vegetable gardens. We all remember watching the moonflowers open at dusk. Another memory that the grandchildren appreciated was brought up by Debbie, and it was making houses out of the boxes in the basement when all the family was together at their home on Danforth. Doug has a single image of Opa and Oma, and that was the two of them waving from the window as we drove from their home. He said that it was such a simple gesture, but one that represented the kind of love that Opa and Oma gave to all of us, an unconditional, everlasting, and soothing love. The great-grandchildren have also felt that love in the visits with Opa, from lunches at the gingerbread house, playing dominoes on the floor, and getting treats from Opa's cupboard. Today we say our final goodbyes to our beloved Dad, Opa, and Gross Opa, a quiet, unassuming, loving, and kind man who taught us how to live, not by his words, but by how he treated people and how he lived his life. At the Mennonite home, where he was so lovingly cared for, he was known as the gentle gentleman. We thank God for the many years that we were able to share our lives with him, and although we are feeling such a loss at his absence, we know that he will always remain in our hearts.
You probably were given this hymn as you came in. And so at this time, two of Henry's great-granddaughters, Aviva Enns and Leila Musa, will sing the hymn, "In a Bulb There Is a Flower." Please join them in singing the third verse. And now I invite Linda Penner, Henry's daughter-in-law, to give tribute to our dad.
This will be my tribute to Henry Penner, who will hereinafter I will refer to as Dad. Now, I have known Henry Penner as Dad for 55 plus years. John and I have been married for 55 years. We were married in July of 1969, And I have known Dad even 5 years, even before that, since my age 16, when John and I first began dating, as soon as he got his license. Now, 6 decades is quite a long time. Now, I knew Dad as a kind gentleman, generous, helpful, patient, a handyman, a Mr. Fix-It, a quiet, no-nonsense guy with a very strong work ethic, no slackers allowed. He was resilient, he was persistent, he was a survivor, and he religiously followed the golden rule, which is treat other people as you yourself would like to be treated. He was loving. He loved people, animals, pets, most of all his family. He welcomed with joy every one of the 8 grandchildren and 13 great-grandchildren. Now, as I said, he was a handyman. He built a family room on the back of their house on Maynard Street and later on added a garage. When the family moved to Danforth in 1974, Dad built a long table for his expanding family. Now, this table was painted a dark slate gray, and it accommodated everyone. Many wonderful memories there of Christmas, Thanksgiving, Easter dinners at that table. Dad was a quiet man. Mom did most of the talking, saying the table grace, reading a lovely poem and or a reading, depending on the season of the year. Now, Dad would sit quietly beside her, but I always distinctly recall that he always was wearing a smile, a satisfied smile, as he surveyed his family from the head of the table that he had so lovingly built by himself with his very own hands. Now, when John and I moved to Wheatley in 1972, I proudly got my first microwave. Remember those early things? Huge. So Dad built an extra cabinet on the back wall of our kitchen. Problem solved. This microwave monster would not take over all of the counter space in my small kitchen. Dad loved to help out in keeping himself ever busy. Dad also loved to laugh and have fun. When we built a swimming pool in the back of the yard, he was one of the first one in. He was in his element, delighted in splashing all the kids and teasing them, bringing anybody over for a swim that happened to be at their house. Now, when we had moved to Wheatley on Hillside Avenue to a much bigger house, it had a nice woodlot behind the house. It bordered to the back of the property back to a creek, and this creek actually flowed into Wheatley Provincial Park. I loved that woodlot, and actually, so did Dad. He loved that woodlot. He came over a lot at that time to help me. We would remove fallen branches, burn stuff, burn leaves, so on. Now, when a huge tree fell across the creek onto a neighbor's back property, Dad industriously, cheerfully helped clean up the mess. I could tell my neighbor, who had initially been very annoyed at the whole thing, was impressed. It was all cleaned up, and he even offered him the wood. So he didn't complain anymore. That is the neighbor. However, the day that he arrived to clean up a dead tree on the side of our property, the dynamics changed. He brought a chainsaw and a not-so-safe safety harness. He was really agile, for a man his age, really agile. Before I knew it, he was shinnying up that tree, dead tree. I was like aghast. Fortunately, my kind neighbor to the side saw what was happening, ran over and intervened, yelling, Henry, stop it, get down, it's not safe. I said, he's hard of hearing, he doesn't hear you. So Bob picked up sticks and twigs and threw them at him to get his attention. And we both yelled and gestured for him, get down, stop, get down. He complied. I was so relieved once his feet touched the ground. Maybe I shouldn't tell you what Bob said, but he did say to me, don't worry, Linda. God has a way of protecting little kids who don't know better, and old fools too. I did say that. So, John and I resolved to talk to Dad about this incident, and I distinctly remember saying, Dad, yeah, Linda? He always says, yeah, Linda? You are welcome here at any time, but you know what? Your chainsaw is not welcome anymore. No chainsaws allowed. Dad agreed. I recall Dad as being especially kind, considerate, and he was not quick to take offense. One day he was having a little lunch with me after an odd job. And as we sat down, I recall I looked at him and said, Dad, yeah, Linda, did you wash your hands with soap? Well, what was I thinking anyway, talking like that to an adult, a grown man? I was not talking to a classroom of 8-year-old school kids anymore. But you know what? However, Dad did not even bat an eyelash. No offense taken. With a little smile, he just chuckled and said, yeah, Linda, yeah, I did. Good advice, though, wash your hands often with soap. Don't forget soap. Dad loved animals, too. This one's for you, Helga. We once had a big, beautiful orange cat called Tootsie. Nobody liked Tootsie, and for very good reasons. Only John and I and our daughters liked Tootsie, and Tootsie only liked us. But Dad even liked Tootsie. Enough said. If you want to learn more about Tootsie, see me after. Dad also had a favorite pocket knife. He would carry it with him everywhere in his pocket. He would even take it out at restaurants to cut his food, And I think some of the grandchildren remember him sitting in his favorite place and on the couch watching TV, get his pocket knife out with a big juicy apple and peel it. As long as all the skin was off, that was fine. Now one day, Dad shows up in a big truck with a flatbed. And on this flatbed is a huge tree stump. And I'm going, now what? Dad is smiling in the passenger seat, waving, calls out, Linda. I brought you the stump. What? I don't think you did tell me, John, but anyway. Apparently, John had given Dad permission to bring it to our place and dump it in the bottom of our woodlot fire pit. Because you see, the tree in Dad's front yard on Danforth, the one the kids all love to climb, had just become far too big for his front lawn. So he had it removed, professionally I assume, and the stump dug out, and brought it to me. John said, don't worry, Linda, we'll take care of it. I was to burn it. Problem solved. Well, it would make a good bonfire, and it did. It made many bonfires. But at least we were not dealing with chainsaws anymore. Time passed, and we downsized, moved to Kingsville in 2007. So the woodlot adventures stopped. So Mom and Dad had moved from Danforth at this time to the 29 Pickwick, and then from there on to the retirement section in the Leamington Mennonite home. As Dad aged, he became more talkative, much more talkative as he aged, often telling John amazing stories that we hadn't even heard before of his past life in the Ukraine, in Germany, especially the early days coming over on the boat and the early days in Canada. You see, Dad was an overcomer. He was resilient. He was a survivor. And these situations reminded me of 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. And I quote, we are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but we're not in despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but we are not destroyed. Dad was in the retirement section of the Mennonite home from May 2016 until mid-June of 2024, 8 years, and there he was so very well cared for. Dad lived a long life, 97 years old, would have been 98 come September. He was the patriarch of the Penner family, and we will really miss him, most certainly, of course. But he has left us a wonderful legacy and a memorable example to follow. So in closing, I've chosen the scripture from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6, 7, 8, taken from the New Living Translation. And here the Apostle Paul is writing his final words as his own death is imminent. And I quote, as for me, my life has already been poured out as an offering to God. The time of my death is near. I have fought a good fight. I have finished the race, and I have remained faithful. And now the prize awaits me, the crown of righteousness that the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that great day of his return. So, let me repeat verse 7 for emphasis. I have fought a good fight, I have finished the race, and I have remained faithful. Rest in peace, Dad.
Thanks, Aunt Linda. We're going to move on and have some food and some fellowship after the service. But I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have come out today, yesterday, this morning, to support our family and to remember Dad and Opa and Gross Opa, Henry Penner. After the service is over, my mom comes up and says grace. You're welcome to exit out the door, and there will be a reception area that we can go to for food and fellowship. So please feel free to stay around. Mom? Oh, and wash your hands with soap.
Could we all bow our heads in prayer? Today, together, we can remember and celebrate those who have left us. We can give thanks for how they have touched our lives, and we can ask God's blessing on our world. Dear God, bless this community, bless this food, and bless all those who have provided it for us. Amen.